Good morning and welcome to this MM-Wired auto-enrolment special. With the government pursuing radical pension reforms, is there a risk that the central auto-enrolment reform is at risk of being neglected? What is the true picture of auto-enrolment compliance? And what is the role of providers and advisors in ensuring that SMEs comply with their legal duties? To answer those questions, I'm joined by Charles Counsell of the Pensions Regulator, Now Pensions Chief Executive Morten Nielsen. We also have Malcolm Small of the Institute of Directors, and Scott GALLACHER, Director at advice firm Rowley Turton. Morning all.
Morning.
We're live today, so if you have any questions for our panel, you can tweet us using the hashtag MMWired. I'm going to kick off with you, Malcolm, if I may. The government has pursued a radical agenda of pension reform just as we're getting to the key point of auto-enrolment as the small firms start to come in. Is that a risk?
I don't think in and of itself it's a risk. I mean, the reforms to the way we do pension saving, I think, are widely welcomed and in fact will work in favour of small, lower-earning employees in terms of the outcomes that they can expect. So I think it actually works in favour of auto-enrolment. I think the risks in auto-enrolment are quite serious as we move into the SME territory, where we've got smaller employers trying to understand their new duties and trying to comply. And I think many of those will struggle. Certainly the evidence so far on larger employers indicates they've had quite a job to understand what it is they've got to do and to comply with their new duties. As we move into the smaller employers, we can expect that to get worse.
Can we get a provider perspective on that, Morten? Obviously huge amounts of system changes, I suspect, to deal with as you deal with these budget reforms, dealing with changing the default funds, etc. Has that been a problem for you, and is that a concern?
There hasn't been a problem for Now Pensions because we are a new provider and we're set up as a master trust, so it's quite easy for us to change our underlying investment structure for our members. So that hasn't been a problem. But we do see that all of this reform is putting a lot of pressure on some of the other providers, and I think with the reform process, the UK budget changes and the charge cap and all these things, we do expect to see fewer providers in the market going forward, and that will probably be the effect of some of this.
Okay, fewer providers in the market. Scott, is that an issue, do you think, for SMEs, a lack of choice?
Definitely. I think we're already seeing a cherry picking of schemes. I think because of how it's been introduced, with the idea that larger employers first, it's meant that a lot of the traditional providers that haven't had the capacity to cope with essentially every scheme have made a business decision in order to effectively limit what they offer, because why would they want to wait to do the person running, say, hairdressers or chip shop with one or two employees when they can pick up the bigger companies with, say, 250 plus members, whereby it's clearly profitable for them. So we're already seeing that with providers introducing either minimum contribution levels and raising those contribution levels, having minimum member numbers. Some of them anecdotally have said that they won't do companies with a staging date post, say this year or maybe next year. So I think the drawbridge is already being raised from the traditional providers, and it's the likes of People's Pension and Now and Nest to some extent that will be left with the remainder of the smaller companies that are left, say from next year onwards.
Charles, from a regulatory perspective, the issue of choice for small employers, is that a particular problem to you? Would you be happy with everyone going into one or two schemes, provided that they're providing good outcomes to their members?
I think that's precisely the point. I mean, look, I don't think it's a surprise that there's a relatively small number of schemes that will be available to the very smallest employers. After all, that was why the government set up Nest with a public service obligation in the first place. I think the good news is that there is a choice out there, and the important thing for all the schemes that are available to the smallest firms is they provide quality outcomes, as you say. And that's why we published a little while ago a set of quality standards that we expect large schemes to provide, and why we have worked with the ICAW to create a assurance framework that means that there is an independent assurance of schemes, so that if you are a small employer, you can look to that scheme and say, well, have you got that master trust assurance? Are you therefore demonstrating the quality standards set out by the regulator? And so that should provide, I think, the sort of standards that we need to have in place for schemes and for those smaller employers.
And Malcolm touched earlier on the issue as you get down to the smaller firms and the micro employers. Do you have any concerns about compliance in that area, and what's the regulator doing specifically to ensure that those people are ready and know exactly what they need to do?
Yeah. Look, it is bound to be the case that as we move through the staging profile and you come to smaller firms, there's going to be higher levels of non-compliance. But we've set out very clearly that we won't tolerate willful or continued non-compliance, and so we'll pursue it, and we've been given powers in the legislation to follow through with employers, and we'll do that. So our message to employers is it does apply to you, it applies to every employer in the country, irrespective of their size, and they should prepare in good time. Now, what we are doing, fundamentally, we believe in educating employers in the first place. So we've committed to write to all employers beginning 12 months before their staging date on an ongoing basis as they come towards the date at which the duties apply to them, that's their staging date, to ensure that they know that it does apply to them, and also to set out what they've got to do clearly for them. So employers will know, and we encourage them to start to prepare 12 months before their staging date. And the earlier they start to prepare, the earlier they do things like choose the scheme, choose their payroll software, the better, so that they're prepared well in advance. If they do that, then I think we can expect very high levels of compliance.
I mean, Charles says that firms should prepare 12 months in advance for auto-enrolment, picking a scheme, etc. How realistic is that, Martin?
It's not what we're seeing with the clients we're signing up. I think we are seeing that quite a large proportion sign up a month before their staging date, and we see quite a few sign up after their staging date. So we do see that they're coming in late, and I think the way we're looking at that is, as a provider, we just need to be prepared for that, because that is probably the case. And I think some of the companies coming in are saying, well, they feel sorted because they've almost made the decision of what they're doing, or they are starting to communicate to their employees. But there's quite a lot of work to be done from there, and there's all the data you need to get from payroll and HR and all of these things. So I think the way we see it is people will come in late, and they will continue to come in late, and we just need to be prepared for that.
Do you think that the regulator's compliance regime, I know that the fines escalate quite quickly for people who willfully don't comply, is that the right approach?
I think with our dealings with the regulator, I think the regulator is taking quite a good pragmatic view in ensuring that companies who are not willful, as you said, willfully trying to avoid the rules are being dealt with pragmatically. So if they're trying to comply, that's one thing. I think if I look at the fines explicitly, it seems that they go from nothing to being quite nuclear quite quickly, and I think that I would propose from a policy point of view that there's some kind of middle ground would probably be a good idea. So
a less harsh fine regime.
Yeah, to begin with, perhaps. Yeah. So because they are quite forceful is my opinion on those.
Okay, Malcolm, I know the IOD's done a lot of research on compliance and the attitudes of small and micro employers. I was wondering if you could just give us an update, because I think the last time I read your research, it suggested that the first response, that you had the first responses from firms saying that they were willfully going to not comply, saying that they just weren't going to do this.
Yeah, we did pick that up last year. Interestingly, I suspect that is going away. What we're hearing from employers now is that they want to comply. There's more evidence of them understanding the social policy imperative here, that if we don't have a pension for people, it will not be economically possible for them to retire. We're finding that employers are encountering situations whereby they've got older workers who they would like to retire and the worker would like to retire, but it's not economically possible for that to happen because there's not a pension scheme in place. So quite apart from the auto-enrolment thing, employers are realising that actually to manage the workforce through into retirement, you've got to have not just a pension, but actually a decent pension in place. So people are already talking about, wait a minute, this 8% of band earnings just isn't going to be enough. And so employers are starting to think about what else they need to do to provide the economic resources for people to retire when they get to state retirement age.
So are you expecting employers to voluntarily start increasing contributions above the minimum?
We're just starting to pick that up, that employers are really starting to understand, wait a minute, if I don't provide a pension to Joe or Josephine, it's not going to be possible in the age of no default retirement age to get them to retire. And anecdotally, I'm picking up stories of employers having to have discussions with employees and winding up getting the checkbook out, because otherwise they can't get Joe or Josephine to retire. And it's an interesting world, but I think auto-enrolment has started that thought process, along with abolition of the default retirement age, that employers are thinking, I've got to do this.
Is that your experience, Scott, when you're speaking to clients? Are they becoming more engaged in their staff's pension?
They are, but I'm worried that that's perhaps a biased audience, because the people that we're talking to at the moment are either bigger employers, so not the micro employers because their staging date is some way off, or people that already have a pension scheme and essentially just want to convert it in order to comply sooner rather than later, rather than put it off, or people who actually want to engage with the process and introduce a good pension scheme for their employees as soon as possible. So I do think there is a biased audience. Those people, I think, when you explain to them how banded earnings work, and I think that's fundamentally flawed, because in simple terms, it's incredibly unfair. It penalises the very young, who should be starting a pension, because the sooner you start, the bigger pot you have. The older people, who arguably should still be saving for their retirement if they're still working. Part-time workers, which are typically women rather than men, so I'm not entirely sure how that gets through the EU legislation on part-time workers, because it appears to me very discriminatory. So the employers we're talking to are introducing, using the other earnings definitions, and I would argue introducing better schemes in terms of the contribution levels and the earnings basis that they're using. But I do think that is very much a biased audience. They're not the people who are either willfully not going to comply or who will just leave it to the last minute and will just pay the bare minimum that they can do by law.
But perhaps, if I may, what we're seeing, we're welcoming every employer. So we have quite a, we probably have quite a representative part of the market, and in that market, we're still seeing that above 10% are doing more than the minimum, which is actually quite encouraging, I think, given that segment of the market we have. So I think we're definitely seeing that quite a few companies are coming to us and saying, we've been thinking about pension for a long time. Now we have to do something. We might as well do something good. So we see that as well.
What's your take on that, Charles?
Well, I think I'm going to pick up something that Malcolm said actually earlier. Our research, there's an interesting thing that's happening, and that's a degree of support for this as a general policy initiative. And what we've seen increasingly, even the smallest organisations are saying, yeah, actually, we think this is the right thing to do. We think the overall policy is right. So, we published research relatively recently, a couple of weeks ago, which showed that 80% of small employers believe that this is the right policy. They believe in the policy intent. 70% of micro employers. Now, I think that's extraordinary. Considering it is a cost for employers. It is extraordinary the degree to which there is support out there for this. And I think that absolutely reinforces the point that Malcolm's making about the understanding of employers of the social imperative, and also there's something in it for them in the end. I mean, it's an interesting point about the point at which employees come to retirement and whether they can retire.
I mean, you say it's a cost, but presumably employers have only got a certain amount of money that they can spend on remuneration. So are we not going to just see a bit more being spent on pension and a bit less being spent on wages?
Yeah, look, employers will treat this in different ways, won't they? So, there's only three ways you can do it. You either put your prices up, you reduce your profit, or you pay a bit of wages into pension. So one of those three things is going to happen.
Yeah. Scott, what's your take on the role of advisors in this whole process? I know that the regulators put a lot of truck in saying that advisors, I guess, need to be ready to do this, and I think most employers in your research have suggested that they will go to an IFA for help. So do you think all IFAs should have some sort of auto-enrolment proposition in place?
Indeed, the marketplace is huge. I did some research the other day and just looking at the rough number of employers that there are, just under 5 million, number of IFAs, 20 or 30,000 roughly. So it works out as approximately 120 employers needing advice for every financial advisor. Now, anecdotally, I'm guessing from the people I've spoke to that probably less than 1 in 10 financial advisors are actually getting involved in that market. So arguably on those same figures, it's 1,600 employers needing help and advice from financial advisors. And I do think it's a huge opportunity for financial advisors. We're in a wonderful fee-based world, so there's no issue now about commission or how do we get paid. It's very much that you work out your service proposition, you come up with a cost that is fair and profitable for you as the advisor, and hopefully is obviously fair for the employer, and that you set your prices accordingly. So that's the opportunity side for it. But also I think it's a threat. I've heard, again, anecdotally, of financial advisors who have originally chosen not to be in this market. They take the view that this is work-based pensions, there's not a huge profit in it, it's quite complicated, so they're just focused on the wealth management, looking after the directors as they have done historically. However, what some of those firms have then found is that the directors have been a little bit aggrieved that they weren't getting the auto-enrolment support from the financial advisor. They've needed to speak to somebody else. So that's probably created a little bit of wedge. And then when they've discovered that the new financial advisor doesn't just do auto-enrolment, does all of the other things, the wealth management side, that people are starting to lose some key clients. So I think both sides, I think it's an opportunity in order to help people to be profitable, to a kind of foot in the door for what would be traditionally the IFA's key target market, business owners and directors. But equally, you need to protect your own clients and also your professional connections. Solicitors and accountants are going to be the people that a lot of these people, if they don't have a financial advisor, are going to turn to. And again, they're going to need somebody to do it. And if you're not doing it, I think that again is going to cause a problem with your relationship with those professional introducers.
Malcolm, if you were an advisor at this time, would you be in the auto-enrolment market?
Absolutely. This is the biggest new business opportunity for advisors that I think I've ever seen in my working lifetime. And it's just not an opportunity you can ignore. We're going to see over 1 million employers needing support over the next handful of years as they take up their new duties. This is, as Scott says, there's a massive opportunity. And it's amazed me the number of advisors who haven't involved themselves in this market. And I'd re-emphasise Scott's focus on the professional connections. Again, from the work I've done amongst IOD membership, it's very clear that small employers without a pension scheme today will tend to want to talk to their accountants, their payroll providers. So forging connections with these people is very important for financial advisors going forward.
Yeah, the pension regulator, we published research recently about the advisor market, and it's clear that employers intend to turn to, exactly as you say, Malcolm, to bookkeepers, to their accountants, to their payroll bureau if they've got someone operating their payroll for them. And the links between those organisations and the IFAs will be crucial. And making sure that if you're an advisor, you've got those links is really important. So the majority of employers are going to turn to advisors for help. And we're encouraged to see the degree to which, particularly in the IFA community, the level of understanding of the regulations. I think the understanding really has gone right up over the period since we started this. To be truthful, with bookkeepers, with accountants, particularly with accountants, more to be done. I don't think accountants have quite got it yet. And we're encouraging accountants really to turn their attention to how this works, because like it or not, their clients are going to come to them and say, help us, do this for us, not just advise us, but actually do the process for us. So they're going to need to get there.
The accountants that we're working with, we've told them in simple terms, to some extent, auto-enrolment is about protecting their own relationship with their clients, because we already know that a lot of clients will put it off to the last minute. We know there's a capacity issue, that it's not as simple as just picking a pension scheme. There's lots of compliance issues around it. However, what will happen without any control of the situation is that clients will leave it last minute. They will pick the phone up to the accountant, probably with the staging date either being on Friday or last Friday, to say, oh, my staging date is just around the corner. You can sort it, can't you? What do I need to do? Don't you have an IFA or something? So they will pass the blame onto the accountant. And whilst it's not the accountant's fault in that situation, it's clearly the employer's, then again, I think that's another wedge that will be driven between the accountancy and their own clients. So what we're saying to the accountants we work with is you want a file of correspondence, emails, letters, seminar invites, etc., going back probably, say, 2 years, so that for those clients that do completely ignore it, that at the very least you can say, sorry Fred, but this is what we've done. We wrote you, we've emailed you, we've sent you seminars. It's your fault it's last minute, and therefore at least then the client will know that ultimately the accountant did all that they could to kind of...
Yeah, and you make an important point in that, which is the accountant, be proactive. Find out the staging date of your clients and talk to them. And again, I go back to the prepare early. You as an advisor can really help the employer to start to think about this early and to start to prepare early. Because you're dead right. A lot of this is about choosing a pension scheme, but actually the majority of this is about administrative business processes that you've got to fix. And in particular, look at your payroll software. Get that sorted early, because if you get the payroll software in place, you get the scheme in place, and you get the links working between those two. As Morton said earlier, making sure you've got the data in place, and you understand what data you've got to provide to the pension scheme. Do all of that, early, and your accountant, your bookkeeper, your payroll bureau can help with all of that. Then you've got a good chance of being prepared in time.
This is really about compliance from the employer point of view. It's not really about choosing pension scheme or anything else. They really just want to make sure that they don't get fined. They just want to comply in most cases. Now, we're seeing that go beyond now just compliance to actually thinking about pension outcomes. But for most employers, it's how do I not get fined? And I think it's amazed me, certainly, the reluctance of the accountancy community and the bookkeepers and the payroll people to a lesser extent, but everybody's kind of been tap dancing around the handbag on this one. And I think advisors who are proactive with accountants have a great role to play in, as it were, fishing the fat out of the fire.
But I think the key thing all of us in the market can help employers with is to simplify things a little bit. Standardize it, don't come up with, and I think looking back at some of the large employers when they staged, it was simply over-engineered. Every bit of the very large rule book from the regulator was used to, in all the corners, to optimize a little bit, and that just, it doesn't work. And I think the point for us is try to simplify it, because if you start to standardize the proposition, whether you're an advisor or an accountant or a provider, then it gets to be simpler and it gets to be easier, and I think that's our focus. Try to push on the policy side also to simplify the rules, but also try to say this is what will work, this is compliant, and this is something we can offer off the shelf, and it should make you compliant quite quickly. When you're up and running, you can start to look at what else you want to do and all of that, but focus on getting up and running as quickly as you can.
The old adage, keep it simple.
Yeah.
Is there anything that the regulator can do for you there to make it simpler, or is that a question for the DWP?
I think
we can ask questions of DWP now.
Yeah, but I think it's actually a question of all of us. I think the DWP clearly has quite an important role in simplifying the overall rules. I know the regulator is working on trying to simplify different solutions. But it's also up to us, because the rest of us in the market, we can also do our part, and the advisors can do their part in this, and payroll providers can do their part in this. So I think it's actually up to all of us to try to work together and simplify this.
We're working on seeing if we can put together what we're calling a sort of compressed journey. One of the things that makes automatic enrolment slightly more complicated than it could be is the choices along the way. And choices are good because it means you can do things to suit your own particular circumstances. But to be honest, for most very small businesses, they just want to be told what to do. So we're looking to work with the industry as a whole to see whether we can come up with something that's a bit of a compressed journey that says, well, if you just want to do the basics, then here's a way of doing it. You can then look to do some bells and whistles later if you like, but here's a reasonably simple way of doing it. It doesn't require to change legislation. It's just a way of being able to do it that's simple.
Would that just be a document then that you'd issue to an employer to say this is the process that you need to go through?
Yes, I mean, some people, it'll be a document, or maybe it'll be maybe there'll be something online that'll allow people to just work their way through a compressed journey. But something, again, if you think about someone who's running a business with maybe 2 employees, some of it is quite simple. You for a very large organisation with 100,000 employees, knowing all your employees, assessing your workforce is quite a complicated thing to do. If you've got 2 employees, you're in the van with them every day. You know exactly who they are. You know how they're old. You know how old they are. You know what they earn because you pay them every week. So it's not that complicated.
Is it not the failure of the original blueprint? Because essentially the blueprint is ridiculously complicated. You're banding earnings, which, as far as I'm aware, there isn't a pension scheme in the world that uses, which employers don't understand. You have 3 different categories of worker or employee. And you have the interaction of employer contributions and employee contributions. I appreciate we can't go back to square one, but you could have had just employer-only contribution, because, as you say, the money is only going to come from one of 3 sources: the pay rise pot, the profit pot, or you're going to increase your prices. Employers in the current climate are not increasing their prices. They're probably not going to want to decrease their profits. So essentially it's going to be foregone pay rises is going to fund most of this. So therefore we could have just ended up with an employer contribution. That would have taken opting out as an option. We could have put everybody in there, and if it'd been phased long enough, then I think that would have been fine for most employers, because most employers we're speaking to at the moment are quite happy to put everybody in. And it would have just been a lot simpler. You could have taken out a whole raft of the complexity just with, you have a pension scheme, everybody's in it, the employer pays, 1% this year, and we'll increase it over 10 years to 10%. And we could have been doing that, to be honest, 5 or 10 years ago. Certainly if we'd done it pre-banking crisis, I'd imagine it would have gone through a lot smoother with, say, the ID members and the people that we speak to, because 1% a year, which essentially would come out of the pay rise pot anyway, would have been enforceable. You end up with a 10% contribution for everybody, job done.
I think this is the Australian experience. If we go back to the early 90s when they brought in compulsory pension saving there, and I think there's a lot we could learn from the Australian experience. I think we've got the chance to do all that learning going down the track. We've got a review in 2017. And I think the shared experience is that there are things we can do to make life a lot simpler for employers and employees.
Unfortunately, that is all we've got time for. Thanks to all our panellists for joining us, to Malcolm Small, Scott Gallacher, to Charles Counsell, and to Morten Nilsson. An on-demand version of MM Wired will be on the website in the next 24 hours or so. Thank you for joining us, and goodbye.